After the flood, the world began again. The waters had receded. Noah's family stepped into a cleansed earth. The rainbow appeared in the clouds. The nations began to spread. And for a moment, it seemed as if humanity had been given another chance to walk in humility. But the story after the flood does not remain quiet for long. Soon, the Bible introduces a name that feels different from the names around it. A name surrounded by power, cities, kingdoms, hunting, Babel, and mystery. Nimrod. He appears briefly in Genesis, but his shadow is long. He is called a mighty one on the earth, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom is connected with Babel, Erech, Akkad, and the land of Shinar. And from there, the story reaches toward Assyria and the great city of Nineveh. In only a few lines, Nimrod becomes one of the most mysterious figures in the world after the flood. Was he a hero, a rebel, a king, a conqueror, a builder of cities, a symbol of human power rising again after judgment? The Bible does not give us a full biography. It gives us something more haunting, a glimpse, a name, a reputation, and a kingdom beginning in the shadow of Babel. To understand Nimrod, we have to return to the world after Noah. The flood had ended the old world, but it had not erased the human heart. The earth was renewed, but humanity still carried the old dangers within: pride, ambition, violence, the desire to build, the desire to rule, the desire to make a name. This is why Nimrod matters. He stands at the point where the post-flood world begins to organize itself again around power. Before him, the story is about survival: ark, water, covenant, rainbow, scattering. But with Nimrod, the story begins to speak of kingdoms, cities, centers of strength, the rise of human authority on the earth. Genesis says that Nimrod became a mighty one on the earth. That phrase is important. It does not simply say he lived. It does not simply say he had children. It does not simply place him in a genealogy and move on. It pauses. It marks him out. He became mighty. In the world after the flood, Nimrod is remembered for strength, for dominance, for reputation, for something that made his name stand apart from the ordinary flow of generations. And then Genesis gives him another title: a mighty hunter before the Lord. At first, that may sound simple. A great hunter, a man skilled in the wilderness, a man strong enough to face dangerous beasts. But the phrase carries a strange weight. Why is this detail remembered? Why does the text repeat the idea of might? Why does Nimrod's identity gather around power? Some have read the phrase positively as a description of skill and greatness. Others have heard something darker in it: a mighty hunter before the Lord, not merely hunting animals, but standing in a posture of greatness in the sight of heaven. A man whose power was known, a man whose name became a proverb. Even in the ancient saying, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The Bible lets the ambiguity remain, and that ambiguity is part of the mystery. Nimrod is not described with a long moral explanation. He is not given a speech. He is not shown praying. He is not shown repenting. He is not shown worshiping. He is shown as mighty, and then we are shown what his might builds. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel. That sentence changes everything, because Babel is not just another city. Babel is the place where humanity gathered after the flood and said, "Let us make a name for ourselves." Babel is the place where human unity became pride, where building became self-exaltation, where ambition rose in bricks toward heaven, where God confused the languages and scattered the nations. And Genesis connects Nimrod's kingdom with that world, not casually, not as a random detail, but as the beginning of his kingdom: Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, in the land of Shinar. These are not just locations. They are signs of civilization rising again: urban power, political centers, organized human strength. The world after the flood is no longer only families spreading across the earth. Now there are kingdoms, cities, structures, Names. Centers of control. Nimrod stands at the doorway of that world. This is why he feels so important. He is not simply an individual. He represents a shift. The post-flood world is moving from survival to empire, from scattered families to centralized power, from the memory of judgment to the hunger for greatness. And that movement is deeply biblical. Again and again, Scripture shows that human strength is not evil by itself. Cities are not evil by themselves. Leadership is not evil by itself. Building is not evil by itself. But when power separates itself from humility, it becomes dangerous. When cities are built around pride, they become Babel. When kings measure greatness by domination, they become warnings. When might becomes the center of identity, the old darkness begins to rise again. That is the question Nimrod raises. What kind of might is this? Is it strength under God, or strength before God? Is it courage or ambition? Is it leadership or domination? Genesis does not answer with a simple label. It gives us the evidence. Nimrod becomes mighty. He becomes a mighty hunter. The beginning of his kingdom is Babel. His world expands into cities. His name is remembered. And from that, readers are invited to feel the tension. After the flood, humanity was supposed to spread across the earth under God's blessing. But Babel resisted scattering. It gathered people into one project, one name, one tower, one ambition. And Nimrod's kingdom begins there. That does not mean the Bible tells us every detail of Nimrod's role in building the tower. It does not give us a scene of Nimrod standing with bricks in his hand. But the connection is strong enough to matter. Nimrod belongs to the same world as Babel, the world of Shinar, the world of human name-making, the world where civilization rises quickly after judgment. This makes Nimrod a bridge between two mysteries, the mystery of Babel and the mystery of empire. Babel asks, what happens when humanity unites without humility? Nimrod asks, what happens when one man becomes mighty in a world still learning how dangerous pride can be? That is why later traditions often remembered Nimrod as a rebellious figure, a king who stood against heaven, a builder connected with Babel, a symbol of tyranny. But even without those later traditions, the biblical text itself gives us enough to see why his name became so charged. He is the first figure after the flood described in this way. Mighty, kingdom, Babel, cities. This is not ordinary genealogy. This is the beginning of something. And beginnings matter. The first city builders after the flood set patterns. The first kings shape imaginations. The first centers of power reveal what humanity will do with its new beginning. And what do we see? We see that the flood did not remove ambition. It did not remove the desire for greatness. It did not remove the temptation to gather power into human hands. The water washed the earth, but the human heart still needed transformation. Nimrod stands as proof of that tension. He rises in the world after judgment, a world that should remember the flood, a world that should remember mercy, a world that should remember the danger of corruption. And yet, almost immediately, might rises again. Kingdoms rise again. Babel rises again. That is the haunting part of the story. Humanity survives judgment, but soon begins rebuilding the conditions that make judgment necessary. Not because building is wrong, but because building without humility becomes dangerous. Not because strength is wrong, but because strength without righteousness becomes a giant. Not because leadership is wrong, but because leadership without obedience becomes domination. Nimrod is called mighty, and the Bible wants us to notice. The word echoes. It reminds us of the mighty ones before the flood, the men of renown, the violent age that became filled with corrupted power. And now, after the flood, another mighty one appears. Not a Nephilim in the Genesis 6 sense, not a giant described by height, but a mighty man whose name gathers the language of power. That echo matters, because the Bible often teaches through patterns. Before the flood, corrupted greatness filled the earth. After the flood, the earth begins again. Then comes Nimrod. mighty on the earth, a mighty hunter, the beginning of his kingdom, Babel. The question is not only who Nimrod was, the question is what his rise reveals about the world after the flood. And the answer is sobering. The world began again, but the old temptation returned. The temptation to become great without becoming righteous. The temptation to build cities without building humility. The temptation to make a name rather than receive one from God. The temptation to gather power in one place and call it security. In that sense, Nimrod is more than a mysterious ancient figure. He is a mirror of human civilization. Every age admires the mighty, the strong, the builders, the conquerors, the founders of cities, the ones whose names outlive ordinary people. But Scripture asks a deeper question. Mighty for what? Mighty before whom? Mighty in whose service? A person can be mighty and still be small before God. A kingdom can be impressive and still be rooted in pride. A city can be great in human eyes and still carry the spirit of Babel. That is why Nimrod's greatness should not be treated carelessly. The Bible does not invite us simply to celebrate him. It invites us to examine what kind of world his greatness creates. His kingdom begins with Babel. That alone should make us pause, because Babel is the monument to humanity's desire to make its own name great. And if Nimrod's rise is connected with Babel, then his might belongs to the same warning. The warning that after judgment, pride can return quickly. The warning that civilization can rise while humility falls. The warning that people can build high and still be far from God. The cities associated with Nimrod also matter. Babel, Erech, Akkad, the land of Shinar. These names place him at the beginning of ancient Mesopotamian power. The world of bricks, towers, kings, walls, administration, control. Humanity is organizing itself, and organization can serve life, but it can also serve domination. It can become a structure that magnifies the human heart. If the heart is humble, power can protect. If the heart is proud, power can oppress. That is why the first kingdom after the flood feels so ominous. It tells us that the new world is already becoming complex. The innocence of beginning again is passing. Cities rise, kings rise, ambition rises. And somewhere in that rising world stands Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. What did he hunt? The text does not say in detail. Perhaps animals, perhaps danger, perhaps the wildness of the early world. But the image of hunting also carries symbolic weight. A hunter pursues, tracks, captures, dominates, controls. And when a hunter becomes a king, the question becomes sharper. Does he protect life, or does he master it? Does he serve the people, or does he possess them? That is why the phrase has been read so differently across time. Some see a heroic founder. Others see a tyrant in seed form. The Bible gives us a figure powerful enough to carry both possibilities in the imagination. And perhaps that is the point. Power is always ambiguous until we see what it loves. Strength can rescue. Strength can also enslave. Leadership can guide. Leadership can also exalt itself. A city can shelter. A city can also become Babel. Nimrod stands at that dangerous border, the border between order and domination, between greatness and pride, between civilization and rebellion, between the world renewed by mercy and the old darkness returning in a new form. This is why Nimrod belongs in the same ark as Noah, Babel, and the nations. Noah builds an ark in obedience. Babel builds a tower in pride. Nimrod builds a kingdom in the shadow of that tower. The contrast is powerful. Noah's structure saves life through judgment. Babel's structure seeks a name without God. Nimrod's kingdom shows how quickly human power can gather around that desire. One man builds because he listens. Many people build because they fear being scattered. A mighty king rises, and the story asks what kind of might will rule the new world. That is the deeper mystery of Nimrod. Not simply whether he was good or evil. Not simply whether later traditions were right about him, but why the Bible places him where it does. why his name appears at this point in the story, why his might is emphasized, why Babel stands at the beginning of his kingdom. The answer is that Nimrod shows us the return of power after the flood, the return of ambition, the return of the human desire to organize the world around greatness. And the Bible wants us to see how dangerous that can become when it is not ruled by humility. In the story of Babel, humanity tries to make a name. Later, God will call Abraham and promise to make his name great. That contrast matters. Nimrod and Babel represent the self-made name. Abraham represents the received name. One is built upward in pride. The other begins with a call and a promise. One gathers people around human greatness. The other becomes a channel through which all nations will be blessed. This is where the Nimrod story points beyond itself. The rise of Babel and the kingdoms of Shinar do not defeat God's purpose. They become the background against which God calls Abraham. Humanity builds its own name. God begins his promise. Human power rises. God chooses a man not because he is mighty like Nimrod, but because God's blessing will define his story. This is one of the great reversals of Scripture. The world remembers mighty kings, but God often begins redemption through unlikely people. A wandering man, a barren couple, a shepherd, a remnant, a servant, a child. He does not need Babel's tower. He does not need Nimrod's kingdom. He does not need human greatness to accomplish his purpose. And that is why Nimrod's story is both fascinating and limited. He may be mighty. He may be remembered. He may be connected with the first kingdoms and great cities, but he is not the center of the biblical story. He is a warning at the edge of it, a sign that the world after the flood still needs grace, still needs humility, still needs a different kind of greatness. The kind that does not build towers to make a name, the kind that listens, obeys, and walks with God. So who was Nimrod? He was a mighty one on the earth, a mighty hunter before the Lord, a figure connected with the beginning of kingdoms after the flood, a name tied to Babel, Shinar, and the rise of ancient cities. A man remembered at the point where humanity's new beginning began to turn again toward concentrated power. Was he a hero, a rebel, a founder, a tyrant? The Bible does not give us a simple portrait. It gives us a mystery shaped like a warning. Because after the flood, the greatest danger was not only that people would become violent again, it was that they would become mighty again without becoming righteous, that they would build again without humility, that they would gather again around their own name, that they would confuse civilization with salvation. Nimrod stands in that shadow, the first mighty king after the flood, a figure whose kingdom began where human pride reached upward in brick, and whose memory reminds us that power after judgment can either serve life or become the seed of another Babel. In the next episode, we will turn from the kings of Shinar to one of the most mysterious objects in the Bible, a golden chest hidden behind the veil, a symbol of covenant, holiness, judgment, and divine presence, the Ark of the Covenant. Where is it now? And why has its disappearance haunted the imagination of the world for centuries?